Next up is Bill Roth from Stantec. Bill has been with Stantec since 1995, working in the Ottawa and Greater Toronto area offices. He's currently the leader of Stantec's specialty services practice globally, which includes integrated asset management solutions, performance engineering, information and communications technology, and Stantec sustainable solutions. Here he is with all the details. Bill?
Thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Good to see you.
Thanks. Well, somebody is... Does that belong to someone? Thanks. I know how valuable those things can be. So, so thank you very much, and thanks a lot to aceBIM for giving me an opportunity to speak to you guys here today. I come at, I guess, a couple of things, other than I'm from Toronto from a confession perspective, so please don't hold that against me. I'm not a designer. In fact, I'm not an engineer or an architect. I'm actually a geologist. I live in the world of existing buildings, operations, maintenance, renewal. I'm new to the BIM game, if you will. I was exposed to it as part of Stantec in talking to a number of our colleagues that do design work. My last confession is I'm a data junkie and a techno geek. So I really saw, after I got over the, oh my God, that's really cool aspect of BIM, and I started to dig a little bit deeper, I saw it really as an opportunity to extract incredibly useful data and information from a 3D model, from a building model, that can be used to help the owners, the operators, the facility and property managers to make better business decisions. Have more accurate information, have more realistic costing and foundational basic information that will allow them to make better business cases as they maintain, renew, and essentially work through the full life cycle of a facility. So what I just wanted to sort of do is sort of step back from specifically the topic of BIM and look at how large organizations are managing their assets today. And so we talk about silos within organizations, pools of money, different budgets, different data sets held by different groups within end user and client organizations, whether that be a corporate governments or institutional client, healthcare, university, across all sectors. We see some iteration of these pools of money, these separate pools of money that are allocated to fix a building, to maintain a building. Most of the buildings that I deal with obviously are older. We don't have good information. We don't have accurate component level information. So part of the exercise is to figure out what's there. But then how do we take all of these different areas, these different silos within organizations that all have their budgets that tend to focus kind of in their own little world, their myopic view of the organization? And I always joke that we do a lot of work for K-12 district schools. And you can always tell the head of facilities, if you look at the needs of a school board, I can always tell what training the head of facilities had, because those are the systems that require the least amount of money and the least amount of renewal. You put a mechanical guy in charge of a school board, their mechanical systems will be great. The roofs will be terrible. Electrical will be degraded. The site will be, and it's not completely true, but it is, you know, I actually did do a run, and it's not perhaps statistically significant, but it is true. And so how do we take all of these different people that are involved in a facility and use that data to pull it back together and start planning from a single pool of money? Whatever organization, whether it's a company, a hospital, a school board, ultimately that money all rolls up. And so how do we use and leverage that information that can come out of a 3D model to not only create better business decisions, but also to provide all of these groups with the information, not just the information that's relevant to them, but the information on the whole asset so that they can understand and plan more effectively, plan together. Don't replace a roof on a building 1 year and come back 2 years later and replace the rooftop unit. If the roof is degraded from a condition perspective and you have an energy inefficient rooftop unit, do it together. I've seen this over and over again. Wasted time, wasted money, disruption to sites. So from an existing building framework perspective, we look at what we call the hierarchy of data analysis. It starts at the base with the have-to-dos, capital renewal, and regulatory and environmental issues. Obviously, in older facilities, there's issues around hazardous materials, and in newer facilities where there's water leakage, you can have mold. That's what we mean by the environmental. But you have to start with these two issues, because no matter how much many of us in this room would like to stop the aging process and the deterioration process with time, the same exists with roofs, walls, mechanical, electrical systems within buildings. So you have to understand, what do you need to do based on deterioration? That's the capital renewal piece. And then the regulatory and environmental pieces, code issues, as I said, asbestos within buildings. These issues are there, but they're often triggered and need to be addressed by a capital renewal issue. So how do we understand that information in an existing buildings context? And then how do we look at the things that actually, in a lot of cases, add value to the facilities? That's from a functional perspective. How can we take this existing space that we have and make it more functional, make it deliver a better program, whether that be in a hospital, reducing patient stay or reducing the amount of time that it takes to serve patients? Sustainability, energy efficiency, all of these things are huge focuses when we're dealing with new construction. And would be the first things that you would look at likely in a new design project. But in an existing building, you're already dealing with the existing bricks and mortar, if you will, and frameworks of these facilities. So that's where a lot of the value add comes in from the organizational perspective. But if we don't have the information on the lower parts of the framework, money tends to flow downhill. Because when your HVAC system fails in the middle of winter, you do whatever it takes to get it working again at no matter what cost, as opposed to proactively planning. So in terms of how does this get brought into the client environment, and how can building modeling, 3D modeling, help integrate this process? Well, from our perspective, the key part of this framework is not only understanding what the client's business objectives are and what their outcome is in maintaining, renewing, and operating their facility, but as it relates to BIM, it really gets to the business process on the bottom. Is what tools is that client using now to manage their business and their facility, and making sure that if we are going to bring BIM into a client environment, that it's done so in a way at the outset, if we're dealing with new construction, if we're setting up a model, making sure that the architecture, if you will, the structure, the framework of the model is done in such a way that can feed into the existing tools. Everybody, no matter what, is human nature. People don't like change. Organizations don't like change, and to bring in a model or a system or a data set that doesn't synergize and fit nicely with existing systems, it's going to limit the amount of functionality and the amount of usage in that operational stage, that full life cycle. You can bring a model in, but if they can't use it, if it doesn't fit with what they're doing now, if they have to completely change the way they've run their business for 20 years, the uptake, the integration with their existing systems will be limited. So how do we understand that at the outset as we're creating and designing the building in a new construction scenario, as I said, so that it fits with their processes, so that we're not trying to square peg around hole when we turn over this wonderful model that has tremendous value to the client. But if they don't know the value, they don't know how to extract that data from it, what good is it? How much will it get used? Will it just be something that sits in a cloud or sits on a server? Maybe, but is that really unlocking the value? No, not at all. So from the outset, from the asset management side of things, data, we all hear big data, we all hear data, there's so much data out there. A lot of the facility managers, the asset managers, the property managers that we talk to are still trying to get a handle on what data exists within our organizations. Back to the previous slide, I sort of had those represented as pots of money or silos within an organization. They all have different data about the same building systems. One of the really unique things about a 3D model, back to the presentation right before, is that we have accurate information coming out of a model on the number of nails that exists within a house, the detailed and accurate information on the different systems, the different components, the different pieces that make up a facility. That data from a maintenance management perspective, from an ongoing, very granular maintenance management perspective, is hugely valuable. That information at a system level for a capital plan and a forecast is incredibly valuable. How do we extract that data? How do we ensure that that data is inside the model, underlying the model? How do we get it out, and how do we do it in such a way that it can feed into other systems that the clients are currently using for their data analysis, their data planning, and their financial planning? So, and on the flip side, I'll kind of go back to, when I kind of work out from the framework, I'll go back and talk about some ideas that we have on how we can integrate this iteratively in the existing building environment where there isn't a 3D model currently existing. After you have an understanding of the data that the client needs, the granularity, the information, the location of existing information, it comes down to tools. How are we gonna use the data? How are we gonna manipulate the data? What other tools other than a 3D model are we using to do forecasting, to do planning, to do analysis? And obviously, a lot of the 3D modeling software represents a huge aspect of the tools and the power of the data. Unlocking the power of the data through tools, software. I mean, heck, a calculator is a tool if it's a simple data analysis. But it's matching what the end client wants to do, the complexity of the analysis, the level of data, with the appropriate tools. So it's not extracting too much information from a 3D model. It's not extracting too high a level information. It's finding that sweet spot when you mesh the client's business objectives with their processes. What do we need to extract out? Where are we going to get it? And how can we leverage the tools to make it more efficient, effective, and accurate? How many people here are involved in sort of the asset or facility management of existing buildings? Okay, a few. How many people have more money than they need to update and renew their facilities? Wow. That's the first time I saw a hand sort of go up almost. It was almost, not all the way up. Most organizations, because we've had years of management practices that have sort of focused a little bit on deferred maintenance, backlog, adjusting funding, we haven't really set aside appropriate reserves. Most buildings are underfunded from a renewal perspective, which means they don't have enough money. In a lot of cases, when you look at a building and you look at the different priorities and the different types of programs we're trying to deliver in buildings that were designed for entirely different purposes, there's not even enough money to deal with the high priority projects. So which high is higher than high is a hugely important question. The only way to answer that question is to merge the integration of accurate, detailed data with an understanding of business process, first principles of design, and the next piece is obviously financial. So how do we? The really interesting part that I find about the existing buildings world is that you need to be able to represent things at a very high level in order to sell the funding agencies, the boards, the treasury boards, the CFO, on getting more money to fund existing buildings and fund renewal and retrofits. At the same time, just having high-level information doesn't cut it. You have to be able to have granular information that when you come back and you're given money to renew a facility, that you're actually able to put all the pieces together and create a project or create a program for your facilities. So there again, the ability of having the incredibly granular down to the number of nails in a house data, right up to the ability to look at things at the system level and at the building level, gives you that flexibility. So that data is all there in the model in an incredibly accurate way. Whereas if you don't have that, it gets far less accurate. So you end up making financial forecasts based on takeoffs of drawings or estimations of quantities. There's error there, let's be honest. I mean, it's the way the industry works, it's plus or minus 20%. Well, the ability to go into an existing building and go, okay, that component needs replacement, and here is to the inch, the linear length of pipe that's present within the facility, is a huge, huge benefit to these end user organizations, because it's not like, well, we estimate this much and we think the project is going to be that. it can get far more accurate. Combine that with some of the augmented reality stuff we saw before and the ability to actually see some of these hidden components and understand better and plan better and execute a project better, overlaying information on, I mean, how many people have done a project in an older building where you open up a wall and you find sort of fluffy white stuff? What's that? Everything stops. Is that asbestos? Isn't it asbestos? That stops. Having that information, having that data available, being able to visualize that will allow for better project planning, lower costs as well. And then the last piece of this framework is obviously the design, execution, and monitoring. And so this very much is an iterative process. It's an iterative framework and idea. And in some cases in new construction, we're starting actually at the outset in terms of designing and building facilities. Well, how do we take into account all those other aspects that will be critically important to the folks that are going to operate, manage, maintain, and renew these facilities so that we design, quote unquote, the 3D model in such a way that it's useful to the client. The data is there, we extract it, it's done in such a way that is in alignment with, as I said, all the other systems. So I see two real big opportunities here for us. One is, and I think it's safe to say that the majority of BIM work has been done in new construction scenarios or major renovation scenarios. So back to the point of how do we design those systems with the end user client in mind and get them engaged with it so that we build those systems so they can use it. But so now when we turn over a building, we have all this underlying information. We're able to use the model throughout design, through collaborative design, through construction, through fabrication, through all the things that we've seen this morning. But how do we then, as part of our process, extract that information to be able to forecast a life cycle projection for renewal? Right, because the folks that maintain these facilities, the systems in these buildings, all of those things are important. But fundamentally, what am I going to have to do when and how much is it going to cost me is a huge issue from a planning perspective. So let's extract that information that's underneath the models. Because to be honest, in the circles that I run in, when I talk about BIM or 3D modeling, I hear a lot of, well, that's kind of neat. It's kind of pretty pictures in 3D, but there isn't an understanding of what's underneath that. And from the asset management side of things, it really, the meat of it is underneath. The understanding and manipulation of that data is really the fundamental value to the ongoing operations of the facility. What can then be done, though, is then once things are planned, once projects are being considered, using that visualization capability to, as I said, better plan and define a project. So it's very much a back and forth type of scenario. But if that information, there's a real education that needs to be done on the asset and the property management side of things, so that people understand what's there and how they can use it. So how do we take those models, that information, and how do we arm asset managers, facility managers, and property managers with more accurate information to go forward, which is great for new buildings. But for every new building, there's many existing facilities that don't have these models. They weren't designed that way. This technology didn't exist 40 years ago when some of these buildings were designed. So how can we, the thing that really interests me is how can we take a client who maybe has a campus of 40 buildings and they build a brand new building and they have all this information, they have all this data, they have all this capability, the visualization, some of the GIS capabilities. How do we try to bring that into an existing building? Back to the fact that these are generally underfunded organizations when it comes to operations. So to go in and say we're going to spend, hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars across a campus to go out and do 3D laser scanning of all our facilities, well, that's money that's being taken away from fixing a roof or fixing windows or replacing a mechanical system that's aged. So we have to build the business case for the usage of the technology and leveraging the technology and bringing it in. And in some cases, there will be organizations that have a vision, that see the big picture at the end of the day. Facility managers, asset managers, they're a pretty pragmatic group. They're a little set in their ways, perhaps in some cases. So I use when I talk about this, I try to use the term pragmatic enthusiasm because, as I said, I'm a real nerd for this stuff. I love it. I get all excited about it. Sometimes that gets a little overwhelming for these meat and potatoes folks that are in these buildings every day. So how do we represent this information in such a way that isn't too holistic for asset and facility managers? How do we help them understand the benefits of more accurate data and more accurate understanding of what's in their buildings? And how do we sell a vision of an iterative program in a facility wherein if they're not in a position to go in all in at once and go in and we'll call it retroactively create a 3D model of what's in that facility. How can we do it iteratively? How can we build the building in a 3D model, almost like a Lego house? So okay, we're gonna go and renovate the east wing. Well, okay, let's start there. We can get some general GIS information to build a shell of the building, and we fill it up with different bricks, if you will, Lego pieces of information. It's kind of eating the elephant one bite at a time as opposed to trying to swallow it whole. How do we do that as part of the ongoing asset management, the ongoing renewal process? It's adding a little bit, but it's also creating the back-end value. And so not only do we want to sell the idea, the concept, but it's about selling the end vision from their own staff's perspective. It's not just about financial planning. It's not just about execution of projects. But when you start looking at some of the augmented reality, you start looking at cloud technology, you start looking at tablet technology, imagine, if you will, a facility manager walking through a building with an iPad, with perhaps some goggles or a helmet with a camera on, and talking to a member of a faculty about, okay, this is what we have today. This is what we're going to do to renew this space. This is how we're looking at doing things. What do you think from a collaborative perspective? Getting stakeholders engaged, having that technology in the palm of the hands. Not necessarily everywhere equally in an existing building, because it can be a little resource intensive sometimes, but just starting that end vision in mind, being able to walk a campus and look behind the walls using augmented reality and going, okay, there's those pipes that we need to replace. There's that infrastructure. There's that IT infrastructure that we need to upgrade. Working with, in a commercial setting, working with tenants, going into a space and visualizing what that space could potentially look like for their usage based on what's there now. These are all, it's all about the end game, the end vision, that both from brand new buildings where we need to bring that information back in, structure things at the outset, consider that operational stage throughout the design, throughout the construction, through the creation of the model, is important to allow for that ongoing engagement, because otherwise it's simply just going to be pretty pictures for these folks. So what do we need to do? Where do we go? What's next? I know we're going to talk about that a little bit later, but I think that we need early adopters. We need champions. We saw some of the stuff that UBC was doing with the GIS and the 3D modeling. How can we find those champions? How can we frame, from an operational perspective, all of this information and all of this value in such a way that makes business sense, where there is a financial understanding and benefit? And it's not all about making money, it's not all about financial, but it sure does help when you make a recommendation that has huge impact from an internal perspective and also has cost savings. So I see a lot of passion in this room. I hear a lot of passion in this room for the technology, for the capabilities and the monitoring. And in that ongoing asset management perspective, I think that the term pragmatic enthusiasm, I think, is the way to go. And I think that through the integration and collaboration of the design community, of the construction community, as well as the operational piece, which is a little less, we'll call it a little less sexy, but is really the 30, 40, 50 years of the life cycle of a process that It will likely be the last stage where, or not the last stage, but kind of the stage that is a little catching up a little bit compared to those other pieces. But I do think that there's tremendous value in the long-term life cycle of a facility, leveraging the information, not only the visualization, but the underlying data within a 3D BIM model. Thank you.